Chanting, welcome. Today we're going to be looking at the first mental body, the MANOMAYA KOSHA. So the MANOMAYA KOSHA is the conscious mind. And, you know, in a way, this is one of the more, they're all important, but obviously the way we think makes up so much about how we think about ourselves and how we identify ourselves. So, and it's also the kosha where we work, where we perceive our experience through. So having a balanced, conscious mind is extremely important in terms of living a full life. So most people have a great interest, right, in balancing and elevating this kosha. So one of the ways the MANOMAYA KOSHA works is that it helps regulate the physical and energetic bodies above it, because it directs the thoughts and deals with sort of the inputs we get. So we get physical and pranic input, and then the MANOMAYA KOSHA has to interpret it. So, in that way, to have a balanced MANOMAYA KOSHA will always affect the other koshas above it. So it's important. An example of that would be, making different, let's say, lifestyle choices with your thoughts, right, that affect the other koshas. And so without that, it's sort of hard to have real deep balance without the MANOMAYA KOSHA being okay. So in order to do this, the mind needs to be open to learning, because you can't direct your thoughts, right, to the more higher levels of consciousness if you're not working with a full set of information. So a closed mind stops changing, so your mind has to be plastic. And if it's really closed, actually, it'll cause disease in the other koshas, right? Disease as in dis-ease, either disease like problems that way, or just non-harmony across all the other koshas. So having an open and balanced mind is important. In a way, our mind's our greatest tool, and if we really want to figure out our problems and make decisions that benefit ourselves, it needs to be functioning properly. And if we really want to figure out problems and make decisions that benefit others in the world, it needs to be functioning properly. So you can't get around this. I like this sutra. It's 234 in the Yoga Sutras. I just wanted to read it to you. Negative thoughts and emotions are violent in that they cause injury to yourself and others, regardless of whether they are performed by you, done by others, or you permit them to be done. They arise from greed, anger, or delusion, regardless of whether it arises from mild, moderate, or excessive emotional intensity. They result in endless misery and ignorance, and therefore, when you consistently cultivate the opposite thoughts and emotions, the unwholesome tendencies are gradually destroyed. So the question then is how do we balance the conscious mind? And there's a whole path in yoga that only deals with this. It's called Jnana yoga, or the yoga of knowledge, or the yoga of wisdom. It's considered, by many like one of the more difficult paths because it requires a lot of will and intellect. And the general idea with it is the mind is used to inquire into its own nature. So the mind is used to look at itself, basically. And then, you can kind of transcend, your over-identification with your ego or your small self. So that's the path of Jnana yoga. The sutra I read before that sort of points towards you have to cultivate kind of the opposite of these negative things. In a way, they're the same, in which is to say you have to really feed the mind a bunch of useful material to work with, right? Or it won't be able to kind of look at itself and find elevation or radical balance, depending on how you want to look at it. So what you really want to try to remind the mind of is truth. So the question we have is how do we do that? How do we get the mind to look at truth? And there's a couple things that have traditionally been done to do that. So I would like to just share with you two practices that might be helpful, right, for you in order to get your mind back in balance. And when you think about it, often your mind moves towards negative thinking. Your mind isn't thinking about sort of the ultimate truth of things. And your mind is left to its own devices, critical thinking. And critical thinking is great, and super useful, but when it kind of is not fed by any other material, then that just becomes criticism, right? And we don't do as well, and then our mono becomes unbalanced, right? And we start to become unhinged in various ways. And we've all experienced depression, anxiety, lethargy, all these things that come from a unbalanced mono. So if you're really looking for balance, one needs to really make it a practice, right, to feed the mind. So we have two ways to feed the mind. One is chanting. The philosophy part of feeding the mind is really good. I really like sort of ecstatic poetry in very simple ways to elevate. So some examples of that would be Rumi or Hafiz, who are Sufi poets. Rilke is great. There's been a long tradition of Christian poets, Sufi poets, Hindu poets, and you've got all these different traditions that write these usually rather short poems that remind us of the oneness of all. And so that's always good. And then I also like little bits of philosophy and practice. Some favorites of mine are Thich Nhat Hanh, who reminds us to be mindful and often writes, again, short passages so the mind can be fed easily, reminding us to be mindful and to pay attention of our immediate existence so we can find our true selves. And then, things like the Yoga Sutras and texts are also good because they give us, just like that sutra I read you, they're short and give the mind something to reflect on, right, that can move it towards truth. So the actual practice, right, of taking in that kind of thing, we're going to call it philosophy for this course, is one way to balance the MANOMAYA KOSHA, the conscious mind. The other way to balance the conscious mind is by chanting. So there's a few sutras on chanting. I just want to read them to you briefly. 127 in the Yoga Sutras is the sound denoting that self is Om, right? So the sound denoting the true self or the greater self is Om. By constantly repeating that sound, one attains spiritual wealth. And then the next one says, from that practice arises the attainment of inward directed consciousness. So you can substitute Om for all sorts of chanting. There's long traditions of chanting in yoga. So we don't have to get stuck on only Om, although Om is a kind of great sound to make. And what we learn from those sutras is then the mind naturally turns inward. So it's not saying turn your mind inward and chant. It's saying chant and then you condition your mind, right, to turn inward and look at the truth. And the one important stage of being attached to the truth is seeing yourself for what you are. And then after that, you can see the world for what it is. So the sounds of chanting themselves have a way of making the mind more sattvic or more peaceful. So we're going to be using sounds. In this course, I've decided to offer a chant I really like, that I've taught to many people and I found really useful. And it's based on grounding the mind in the body. And through that, through that process, the mind gets grounded towards what are the lower chakras. So there are many ways to chant. Some will be very uplifting and up here. Some are more grounding. Some are both. But I chose this one for this course because the result of this chant is often a feeling of deep groundedness and deep balance. And from that place of deep balance, one is usually able then to let more of the world and the universe and the truth in. So in the end, it leaves you more open, but instead of just going for a direct opening, right, we go for a grounding, right, that allows us to see things as they are and allows us to take in more and have more capacity. And in this way, just like the other ways we've been thinking about things, we become way more balanced and we can handle more opening or elevation. So you could think of it that way. So what I'd like to do is teach you how to do this chant. So let's look at the chant. So the chant is Om Aim Hreem Kreem Namaha. And we're going to keep it nice and simple. So when you chant this particular chant, you're going to keep the voice a little bit lower. It doesn't have to be super low. I have a rather low voice. You might not, but not upper. So you want to feel the chant from your pelvic floor to your navel. This is where you're feeling the chant, right? Not up in here. So I'm just going to show you the chant. I'm going to chant it a couple times so you can hear it. Om Aim Hreem Kreem Namaha. Om Aim Hreem Kreem Namaha. Om Aim Hreem Kreem Namaha. So that's the chant. You might have noticed that it's done, you might not have noticed, but you might have noticed that I'm doing that with one breath. So you breathe in, and then you chant. And however long your out breath is, that's the length of your chant. Then you breathe in, and then you chant. So to start, I would recommend doing it out loud. And you could do that, over and over again for a few minutes. I would say start with 2 minutes. They make it 2, 3, or 4 minutes, the chanting. And then if that's working out well, you can then chant softer. And then if that's working out well, the other option is to do it just silently to yourself. So you're actually thinking, Om, Aim, Hreem, Kreem, Namaha. So it's easier to chant out loud. It's actually just as powerful to not make any noise, or even more powerful to not make any noise. So I'll leave that to you to experiment with. If you're new to chanting, definitely do it out loud. But if you're in an office or something, don't feel like it has to be loud in order to work. It doesn't. You could chant very quietly. Kreem, Namaha. It's fine. Over and over and over again. One breath each. So what I'd like to do here is I like to do it a few times for you. Just a reminder, you're feeling it from your pelvic floor into your belly area. So that's where you want the chant. If you're chanting silently, that's where you have your focus. Like you're bringing your mind down to that area that will ground your lower chakras, which will in turn open your upper chakras. So we haven't talked a lot about chakras, but it will ground lower so that you can receive more in. And in terms of the mano, which is here, right, the MANOMAYA KOSHA, it will ground it into your body so it is deeply, deeply balanced. And when it's balanced, it can move more methodically, more slowly, and always have like at least one eye on the truth. And that's the goal. So I'm just going to finish here by chanting it several times for you. Om Aim Hreem Kreem Namaha. 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 Om Aim Hreem Om Aim Hreem Kreem Namaha. Om Aim Hreem Kreem Namaha. And after you've done the chant several times, you just sit. You feel the effects the chant has had in your body. You leave your mind unadulterated and just see the speed and nature of your thoughts, as long as it's comfortable for you. And then whenever the urge strikes to be done with that, you're finished and you move on either to your day or your next practice. So I hope that the philosophy and chanting really has us noticing, right, that our mind can be really shifted when it's fed practices that lead it towards the truth. So I look forward to seeing you next week and to meeting up with you online, and enjoy your practice this week. Om Shanti, Om Peace.